Hello, I'm here with my friend Dara Okani, and I'm going to talk today about something that I've noticed on G Client. That I'm not so sure about, and I think it would be a good informational video for anyone looking to buy in the client and also looking to sell. And if anyone making decisions at GG sees this, maybe they might want to reconsider this feature. I think it's important to note that we're not coming after GG. They're not taking a fee on this. I think the selling client is a great feature in general, and it's a zero-sum game. But we're just going to try and point that out. So, Dara, what do you reckon about this feature that we're seeing? And yeah, I can show you what we're talking about first of all. But
Okay.
welcome, Dara.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah. Similar to you, I had some concerns when I saw this. And again, similar to you, I do think it's a great feature in the client that they're doing staking, because the way staking has traditionally been done, the backer has to sort of connect, or sorry, the person who's selling has to connect with the people who are buying stakes, and it's done by messy transfers and so on. This basically automates everything, where people just click a button to buy, and it's all handled by the client. So I think it's a really great feature in GG, and they're not making any money from it too, which is commendable. My only concern about this is that traditionally, I mean, there's always been arguments around makeup in when people are buying tournaments, and that's fair enough. It's very difficult to assess anybody's real edge. So there have been arguments down the year, let's say, where people have said somebody's selling it too high. I think the market has got more sophisticated on that front last few years, in the sense that people kind of have some sort of awareness of what kind of edges are realistic. But also there's a kind of a realization that it's a market. So ultimately people can sell at what they want. And if they sell out, then, fair play to them. You can't really expect somebody to sell at 1.1 and have it all snapped up if they could sell at 1.5 and sell the lot as well. It's really up to the buyers to decide whether they feel the markup is fair. The problem with this, and specifically, I think, is that it introduces a new element, which is ICM awareness, which is really beyond the reach of a lot of players. So that's why when you mentioned this feature to me, I was very interested in looking at how the ICM changes things.
Right on, yeah. So I'll just quickly explain what we're looking at here. So this is the day 2 for the event. It's the phase event this week on GGPoker. 8,000 Hong Kong dollars to buy in, and these people have already made it through to day 2. Okay, so this is the day 2 lobby. Now they're using this called ASMU, like a really technical term. But I thought, okay,
totally new.
They must have done something sophisticated here but no. What it is, if you bag 7.71 starting stacks, let's say, just looking at the first example in the lobby, you sell at an automatic markup of 7.71. Now, to casual viewer, that might sound right. Casual observer, casual buyer, that might sound fair enough. But anyone who's had any kind of look at ICM across their career, and by the way, Dara was the first person who came to mind when I thought who I'd want to make this video with when it comes to ICM. He literally wrote the book on satellite, so he knows exactly what he's talking about. I thought that something was up here immediately. When you double your stack in a tournament, your stack does not instantly become worth 2 buy-ins. Now, why is that? If it was a cash game, which a lot of people play as well, it makes sense, of course. If you double up your $100, you now have $200, and that's you can cash that out. That's the value of it. Trouble in tournaments is you can't win 100% of the prize pool, unless it's a heads-up sit and go or some other kind of free roll with a seat up top. Like these winner-take-all tournaments are rare to see. So that's the problem that we have with this, and we're going to take a little bit of a dive into it. Another problem I have with this is that you can add a markup on top of this. Reiner here might be one of the players in the lobby potentially worth a markup. As we're going to see when we look at the ICM calculations, it's potentially a sketchy situation. Sketchy is the wrong word because it is a market and people might not know. But if you're a buyer on GG or a player selling, then you might want to reconsider. So typically you can only win 15% of the prize pool. And that's what we're going to get into now. Of course, bag day 2, you're quite close to the money. You're close to getting 2 stacks. But basically, the rule is that ICM favors the shorter stacks. Sorry, that's wrong. An ICM chop, let's say, in a tournament, you're on a final table, you chop, an ICM deal would favor the shorter stacks. You notice the numbers are different between a chip chop and ICM deal. And a chip chop favors the bigger stacks, and ICM deal favors the shorter stacks. And basically, that's quite related, would you say, that Dara, to the concept that we're going to be having a dive into?
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally related. The basic idea is that every chip in a short stack is worth more than its equivalent in a big stack. The bigger your stack gets, the less each chip is worth, because for a start, your winnings are capped out at first prize. So if you have half the chips in a tournament, you can't have half the prize pool because no tournament plays 50% even for first. But if you have a small stack near the bubble, that can actually be potentially worth more than it was worth at the start of the tournament, because you have a decent chance of min cashing. So yeah, the basic principle is the more chips you have, the less those chips are worth. Now that runs counter, I think, to a lot of people's intuition. They feel that it's good to have a big stack because you're going to finish in the top places more often. And you sometimes hear people say, oh, I don't want to enter right at the close of registration because I'll be short stacked. Actually, from an ICM point of view, that's really worthwhile. Your chips will be worth more than they were at the start of the tournament. And then the corollary of that is that when you have a huge stack near the bubble, yes, you obviously have more equity than you had at the start because you have more chips, but it hasn't increased by the same amount. If you have increased your chips, let's say, to 30 starting stacks, you do absolutely not have 30 buy-ins worth of equity at that point. And I think that's the real issue, because if people are buying 30 starting stacks and thinking 30x is a reasonable price, and maybe even adding markup on top of that, I think what we're going to show in this video is that actually it's not. Your expectation with 30 starting stacks is considerably less than 30 buy-ins.
Spot on. I agree with all of that. Hopefully that's understandable conceptually. Basically, we've just tried to illustrate that doubling your starting stack is not worth 2x a buy-in. And we're going to have a look at exactly how that works out. One thing I will mention, I'm sure some people will be thinking it, yes, if you have a big stack on the bubble, you can swing it around and it does have better utility. We're ignoring that for now, and we're ignoring skill edge too, assuming that every player has as much chance to win each pot, same win. Which I think is, looking at this kind of thing, is definitely the right place to start. Okay, cool. I think we've covered that. So should we get into the ICM situation that you looked up here?
Sure. Can you see my screen, or do I have to share it again?
Yeah, that's sharing perfectly. We can see the browser.
Okay. So what I've done here is typically in these, for example, in the WSOP events, maybe you're getting 1,000 runners or 900, let's say 900 runners at the start, and maybe 150 are coming through and 90 are going to be paid. Unfortunately, there's no computer on Earth strong enough to work out, or powerful enough to work out exactly the ICM in that situation, because the thing about ICM is the amount of calculations just escalates the more players that are left. So when you have 3 players left, there are 6 possible 1, 2, 3 scenarios that you have to calculate for. So it's relatively trivial to calculate. By the time you get up to 9 players, I don't know the exact number, but it's something like 170,000. By the time you get up to 12 players, it's over 100 million. So once you get past 15 players, it's just not feasible to calculate. So what we're going to do here is we're going to simplify the situation down to, let's say, a 90-runner field. So everybody started with 1,000 chips, and 15 got through to day 2, and 9 are going to be paid. So you can see here in the payouts, we've put a payout structure where the main cash starts at 1.5, which means 1.5 buy-ins. And then each place above that rises to a first prize of 33 buy-ins. You can see the total here is 90. So that's the 90 buy-ins accounted for in the field. Similarly on the stacks, for this purposes, I put a starting stack of 1k. And the chip leader has 30k, so he has had an amazing day one. He's come through with 30 starting stacks. Second place has 15 starting stacks, 10, and so on down. I put in a bunch of 1k stacks at the bottom. So these guys have either max late regged or they've just had a very dull day one. But again, the total is 90,000, so that's 90 starting stacks. So we have the entire payouts accounted for and also the entire starting stacks. Now, this is the point where we actually can calculate now what's the actual equity based on these payouts of the different stacks. And remember, this guy is 30 starting stacks. This guy is 15 starting stacks. So if there was a chip chop at this point, this guy would be getting 30. This guy would be getting 15. This guy would be getting 10. And all the way down to the guys at the bottom would be getting 1. Now let's click the calculate and we'll see how the ICM changes things.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can see, I mean, it jumps out immediately that the chip leader stack is worth a lot less than it would be in pure chip equity terms. He's actually not even 20 buy-ins, let alone 30. But the guys down, the corollary of that is that the guys down at the bottom actually have more equity than their chips. So the guys who have a starting stack, who started with 1 buy-in in equity, actually have 1.5565. And on an aside, this is why max late regging is so profitable in tournaments, or at least one of the reasons why. Because if you were able to buy in at this stage and get this 1,000 starting stack, on average, your expectation, assuming you have average skill relative to the field, would be 1.556 buy-ins. So you'd actually be making 0.5565 of a buy-in purely by late regging.
Yeah, just pressing the button. That's very interesting to see. So this is a fairly realistic example, and whilst it's not going to be exactly the same transferring it to a mega field, would you say? So
yeah, it won't be exactly the same. And the biggest factor will be how close we are to the bubble. Because the closer we are to the bubble, the better chance the small stacks have of actually making that min cash, and the more the bigger stacks are penalized. What we'll do after we've digested this example, I think, is we'll take another example where we're farther away from the bubble, so maybe only 5 people are paid, so 1/3 of the remaining field. We'll have a look at how that changes things. But even though this isn't exactly the same as 150 players left, 90 paid, it's analogous. It will always be the case that the biggest stack in the field has the biggest drop in equity, the biggest difference between his chip equity and his actual equity. It will always be the case that the smallest stack in the field has the biggest gain. If you think about it, he's basically gaining 55.65% ROI just by virtue of having this short stack. By the time we get up to, say, the 2K starting stack, it's now down under 15. Oh no, sorry, under 50%. By the time we get to where's the crossover point? The crossover point is somewhere between 10 and 15. Even at the 10K starting, even at 10K day 2 stack, his equity is slightly more than the 10 starting stacks. It's really the chip leaders who suffer the most, and specifically the chip leader who suffers the most. And I think this runs contrary to a lot of people's intuition. They think it's really good to buy a big stack. So if we take an extreme example, let's imagine this guy sold at 2.0 in addition to the 30 starting stacks. That means he would need to be making 60 long term just for the buyer to break even. Now his EV is less than 20. So if he needs to be an incredibly skilled player with over a 200% edge, which I don't think, to be honest, any player in the world has.
And an incredibly skilled deal maker when first prize is 33.
This is true as well. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It would actually be impossible for him to make more than 33.
So
that really makes the
loss
point.
In that situation. And I think this effect is actually going to be more in the bigger fields because it's only 15%. Rather than 35 or a little more than that.
Yeah, you're really capped out. Now it's less likely. I mean, we've given this guy 1/3 of the chips. It's less likely, obviously, with 150 people less, that somebody has 1/3 of the chips. But nevertheless, the same principle applies. The bigger the stack, the more the drop off.
Yeah. So this is just a demonstration, but I think if it goes in one direction, it's going to be an even worse proposition to be buying big stacks, just because you can only win 15% of the prize pool.
Yeah, I agree with that. And most of the time, even with the big stack, he's going to, if there's 150 paid and, 150 left, 90 paid, even if he's a big stack, in most worlds, I mean, any experienced tournament player will know he's usually going to cash, but he'll usually bust out somewhere in the 40s, and that really doesn't pay very much. So I think it's a very minus EV option to buy shares in a big stack. The corollary to that is that if you buy shares in a small stack, assuming the markup isn't egregious, that could be a very profitable proposition. In this specific example, if this guy with 1,000 one starting stack was selling at, let's say, 25%, you would already be making money in terms of your expectation. You'd be paying 1.25 and his expectation is 1.55. So that would actually be a very good deal. Again, totally counterintuitive, because most people would think buying a big stack is better than buying a small stack, but actually it's the other way around.
Exactly, yeah. So it's important to mention that it's a zero-sum game. GG aren't taking a rake. The winners or the losers are the buyers, sellers, and vice versa. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to educate the market so that they make educated decisions. I do think it's a great feature that they have automatic staking, and even day two, there's nothing wrong with it intrinsically, so long as people realize that when they buy a big stack, they shouldn't be paying markup.
Perhaps the opposite, because you can sell it marked down.
If you can sell it marked down, that's good. I mean, like if this guy has let's say this guy has a 10% skill edge, then okay, his expectation is 19.4. So a fair price would be somewhere around 22 of the 30. So if he sells at 0.75, that's a fair deal. But if he's selling at 1.6, there's no way any player in the world is profitable at that.
Cool. Yeah, there's no way that someone's going to be selling at 0.3 or anything. But yeah. That makes sense to me, that it's around about there where things start to be around about there, not factoring skill edges as well. And yeah, again, it is a market, and people should be willing to let that run as long as the sellers know what they're doing. My thought is that after seeing this demonstration, perhaps the big stacks might not want to sell with a markup, given that the people that they are profiting from, if we consider them to be the winners, profiting from their buyers, they're supporting them. They're out here rooting them on. So on the one hand, you might think, let's hop in the lobby and sell off as much as we can, print. On the other hand, these guys are supporting you. They might be your friends, so you don't have to be whacking the markup on there. Maybe consider a markdown. That will definitely get bought if you sell at 0.95. Like, people love a discount.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like I'm certainly not attacking GG or even players who have sold. I think a lot of players wouldn't realize the ICM hit that the big stack takes, so they might actually think they might overvalue the big stack, and they might not think they're charging egregious markup if they charge 1.6. They might think, well, I have a skill edge of 60%. I have a big stack. I'm going to push that around. And I mean, as you said, there is some benefit to having the big stack. They will have more plus EV spots as the bubble approaches, and but it's very, very easy to overestimate that as well. That might add 5% to your edge long term, but it's not going to compensate for this sort of thing here, where we can see basically you are already you have to have more than a 50% edge just to break even.
And we're talking about buy-ins, like, going on top of it. It's like, you bought 50% to someone with this system, you're paying a lot of buy-ins extra to have the opportunity to do so. So if you're buying 1% here or there, I mean, it obviously works out the same, but like, the potential is there to just a lot of money to exchange hands on this. Yeah, I don't know if I demonstrate that point especially well, but
yeah. So I thought what we do now is, okay, well, this is relatively near to the bubble. So, 15 left, 9 paid. So, 3/5 of the field are getting paid. What happens if we're farther from the bubble? How does that change things? So let's say only 5 are paid. So again, we're doing an analogy here where we're saying that whatever the number that gets through, whether it's 15, 150, or 300, a third of the field basically are going to get paid rather than 3/5. So we'll add a bit to the various prizes. Well, the min cash will probably still just be about, let's say, 2, maybe a bit more. Well, no, it's still only going to be 2 because, yeah, it's 2. We'll make this 4, 3, say. We'll make this 6. We'll make this 16, and we'll make it more. Let's say it's a very top heavy structure because there's a big first prize. So we're going to make a really big first prize. So you would think that this would now benefit the big stack because more is in the first prize. In the previous example, we saw that the big stack was basically capped out at 33 buy-ins, and since they had 30 starting stacks, that meant even if they won the tournament, they were only going to be 10% ahead. Now, when we click the sorry, this doesn't add to 90 yet, so I'm going to have to make it more. Let's make this 20, and we'll make this 59.
So it's a really top heavy one. 59.
Really top heavy now. So you would say, okay, well, maybe the ICM isn't going to be that big a deal.
This would be closer then to what we.
Yeah, and you can see even with this incredibly top heavy structure, there's still a significant hit to the big stack. It's more than 10%. So if they're adding markup on top of that, that's going to exacerbate the situation. Again, the short stacks aren't making as much as they were in the previous example. In the previous example, they were making 55% of a buy-in. Now they're only making 13.5%, but they're still making. And this again is quite counterintuitive because I think a lot of people wouldn't realize that with just a starting stack with 15 left and only 5 paid, they would think that they were actually at a disadvantage. I've heard recreational players say, oh, I wouldn't buy in at this stage because you have so little chance. But actually, in the long term, under ICM, assuming equal skill, you're making an auto profit just by late edging at this point or having a starting stack. Your stack is worth more. You can see that in this example, everybody above, where's the crossover point? Yeah, again, the crossover point is more or less 15 at this point. The guy with 15 starting stacks has slightly less than 15 in equity. So it's really the chip leader who's lost all the equity in this example. So again, reinforces the point that the bigger the stack, the more the hit.
Right, yeah. So that's a lot closer to what the GG model would be. But sadly, yeah, even with 59% of the prize pool, the chip leaders will be losing some equity there. Can we do one more example where we see like a really shallow payout? Let's say 15% prize pool is to first.
15 for first. Okay. Yeah.
So
this is something we went into obviously in detail in satellites because obviously the shallower the structure. Okay, so we'll do 15.
Maybe actually, like 14 or 13.
14. Yeah. Let's take a fairly extreme example.
So an actual proper analogy of this would be somewhere in between.
Yeah, and that's correct. Okay, so let's do this. This now adds to 90, which means we have the 90 buy-ins accounted for. We're paying 9, but it's a shallower thing. And to be honest, this will be closer to the real life example of 150 paid, 90 left, because for a start, the buy-ins are maxed out at 15% of the prize pool, and again, most tournaments don't pay more than that. And secondly, when you zoom out from a 90 left, a lot of the places pay the same or very similar. Like it doesn't matter too much whether you bust in 50th or 36th. So actually, it's less. The difference between 50th and 36th is, or let's say 50th and 30th in a 90 player paid tournament is typically less than the difference between 5th and 3rd.
Right.
In a 9 paid tournament. So this will actually be closer, again, I think, to a real life example of what we'd expect the ICM to be with 150 left, 90 paid. And this is dramatic, as you can see.
Yeah, so let's take that in. So you've got 30 starting stacks. Your stack is not worth 30 starting stacks. It's in fact worth 13.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Second place gets punished, and then third downwards. either the same or from fourth downwards actually doing pretty well just from being in there because obviously it's exaggerated with the flattened payouts. Like it's not realistic, but we reckon this is closer to.
This is going to be closer for sure. I mean, your intuition was correct that that the actual real life example of 150 left, 90 paid would be even worse than the 15-9 example we gave. It probably won't be quite as bad as this, but it's going to be near. You can see that the short stacks are really benefiting now. They're making more than 100%. This is something we preached at length in our satellite book. Late hedging satellites is incredibly profitable because of the flat payout structure.
So I've been putting that to work lately. GG ones.
Yeah, they allow really late reg as well. So there's a lot of exploitation there. Yeah.
Cool. So one other thing we mentioned in a few of these examples, it's just a chip leader or just the top two stacks. Now, obviously, this is multiplied by a factor of 100. Yeah, 10 or 100.
Yeah.
So it will be like the top 10, top 15, maybe 20% stacks that are getting this like crushing reduction.
Yeah.
So it's not just the chip leader in the tournament. It will be the guys with the big stack. And in this example, look at the bottom stacks. They're getting double their money. So yeah. Maybe it's massively plus EV to be buying up little stacks. I would say probably.
I would say probably too, because I think a lot of players will sell the small stacks thinking their stack, actually undervaluing their stack. And it's interesting, when I spoke to my co-author about this, Barry Carter, and Barry's essentially a recreational player, but he's become sort of very ICM aware through the process of having written the satellite book with me. And he immediately said, he identified that's going to be terrible for the big stacks and it's going to be really good for the short stacks. The short stacks would be value.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we have it there. Of course, it doesn't matter how close they are to the money because like a big stack's going to cash. The chip leader going into day two in these phases where you're fairly close to the money, he's going to cash probably over 98% of the time, maybe a little less. So that would be 2 buy-ins locked up. But if you're like, let's say he's got 30 stacks and you're paying a markup of 2, you're paying 60 buy-ins. It's the same as, would you pay 60 markup at the start of a tournament if he would be in that position before that? Absolutely not, I would say. And these charts should explain that to you. So hopefully to everyone watching, that's at least a reasonable demonstration. Got any questions, we'll do our best to answer them in the comments. Or if you know Dara or me, just hit us up and we'll give it our best shot. Do you have any closing remarks on that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for inviting me on to do this. I think this is something which people, if they're buying at the adjusted markup, they really need to be educated on this stuff so that they're not making investment decisions that turn out to be very bad. Obviously, people can do what they want, and they can still ignore this completely if they fancy the sweat of a big stack. But just be aware that when you do buy a big stack, you are unless there's markdown involved, you're making a minus EV investment.
Exactly. Yeah. So buyers beware. Try and think of how their stack, what percentile of their stack would fall in versus use the average stack to have a look at that. And be aware that the top 10%, especially the top few percent, they'll be getting extremely good deal from selling at the adjusted stack ASMU. But thanks, Dara, for coming on.
Thank you, Adam.
Chatting for us with that. Check out Dara's book, by the way, Poker Satellite Strategy. He literally wrote the book. It's extremely comprehensive and it's the best there is out there. And he's recently published his sequel, PKO, Progressive Knockout Poker Strategy. They're becoming more common across the sites, making up a lot more of the schedule. So check Dara out on Twitter and check out his books. Very reasonably priced as well. Highly recommend.
Thanks, Adam.
Little plug at the end there. All right. Thanks, Dara.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam.